welcome. This is the second video of this podcast. I am your host, Alex Kessler, with my co-host, Ben Bayman, too. We have Braden Bowdish. God, I missed it. I had it. Now you guys made it last time. I crushed it so hard. We have Braden Bowdish here today, guesting, and we are talking about cEDH, etc. But I do want to actually get into that because I think that's a really cool defining feature to competitive play versus any other type of competitive play. And that is the statement, do you have an argument for that card's inclusion? And I think that is, to me, maybe the biggest differentiating point between casual play and competitive play. And if you look at modern, if you look at legacy, if you look at standard, most 2v2 formats, when you're building a deck with the purpose of winning a tournament, every card inclusion you need to explain, right? There, like sometimes it's like once in a while there's like a weird one that you like, but even those, they're normally going to be more powerful cards. Or why are you playing colonnades over this? It's like, well, because in these situations I think these are better, but or I think just like having a free win condition on my lands is good, even if at that point the metagame has moved past it. But it almost ostensibly is always like you have a argument for why that card exists, versus regular Commander, where like I agree with the vibe of like, I'm playing cards because I like them, they're fun. Or I really like this card, I want to play it. I really want to play the blue-red Minotaur Cascade card that you can bounce to your hand that's pretty miserable and not very good, but like I have no other way to play this card. So I liked it, so I want to try playing it. But with cEDH, there is much more of a conversation on like, can you argue for the choices you're making? And I'd love to kind of delve into that a little bit more deeply on like, is that the defining feature of a competitive format?
I mean, I think we talked about this a lot, Alex, in the past on various episodes of the cast, right? Like when I played Phoenix in Portland, I think it was a couple of years ago, and I lost a bet and I had to play an actual good deck and did like pretty well with it. I put a single copy of Cerebral Vortex in my deck, which it was a silly inclusion, but the logic behind it and why I justified it was the card, for those that don't know, is blue-red 1 instant. Target player draws 2 cards and then takes damage equal to the number of cards they have drawn this turn. So the idea was that the whole format was Blue-Red Phoenix, right? Everybody was playing that deck. It was the big deck of the weekend. So if you play against, at that point, a single copy of Looting, because everyone was playing Looting, with the single card drawn on their turn, 2 cards drawn off of Looting, and then the 2 cards off the Vortex, it's a 3-mana Lava Accidents and Speed, right? That's on any Looting turn, it's a guarantee. And if they're playing one of those turns, they play like a Looting and a Thought Scour, it's potentially like 6, or even up to, if they play 3 spells, 7 damage for 3 mana and speed. You could close the game out, right? It could just be over. But also, at the same time, if you play it on your opponent's turn, it's just 3 mana, draw 2, take 2 damage. It's a totally reasonable card for you to be playing as a draw spell in your own deck. And I liked it. It didn't win games for me, but at the time when I took it into the tournament, I knew it was a little janky, it was a little fringe, but there was real logic behind it based on a metagame choice that I believed in, and it made sense for me to cut some other card that people liked to take a chance on this one thing. I like to usually do that. 1 to 3 slots in decks that I build, I'll usually try something like that. You're like that with Loam and Jund. I know, Alex, you've done that for a long time.
Well, yes,
we'll come up with these ideas.
But like, as you just did, right? I can argue for days why I think Loam is good in Jund. I think like when you have a Loam, one Loam. Like the problem with Loam is you don't want more than one, but if you get that one and you have Liliana the Veil in play, your Liliana Veil is on speed compared to what it would be without it. Because you can discard the Loam, worst case scenario, but then once you cast Loam and you have 3 extra lanes in your hand, discarding a land while like you're drawing 3 cards a turn with Loam and they're discarding real cards is like a beating. And that doesn't even get into like, oh, you play 1 or 2 cycle lands, so now you have like an insane card draw engine out of the deck. That like also is good with Dark Confidant. You have the ability to like get your like Fatal Push. Like people were like slowing down on playing Raging Ravine because Fatal Push was so good against it. But with Loam, your Raging Ravine, now you can play 2 of them, and you just guarantee you're always going to have one to fight them. Not to mention the world of Ghost Quarters or Field of Ruins, et cetera, et cetera. So like I can argue for days that these are the reasons that Loam might be good in the deck, and those arguments are why Wrenn and 6, when it did get printed, became a staple, right? Like the things that it was doing for the deck were very powerful. And then Wrenn and 6 comes out and just like is a little bit more of an efficient, well-rounded version of the card, and then just like is now, a main feature to the format and the deck. So like I think and you just made the argument yourself, right? You have to be able to argue why this card is in your deck versus like, oh, I just want to play this card because it's fun. Like there needs to be an onus behind each card choice you have.
That argument, though, and I'm going to throw to you here on this, Braden, to hear your response on this, because I want to know if you do this at all with your cEDH decks. But like that experience of coming up with the arguments we're talking about and identifying with your deck, it's a little bit more of like a Johnny idea with deck building. It's not really Timmy, because it can be, but it's not really usually, and it's definitely not Spike. It's a lot more of the Johnny aspect, which is like, I want to win, but I didn't want to do it my way. And so having that justification where you want to do it in a way that is specific to you and coming up with that argument, I think is actually one of the things that makes Magic such a beautiful game and such an incredible game. If you do it 3 or 4 cards out of 60, the percentage chance that it's going to actually affect the game is so low. Ultimately, you may not even see the fruits of your labor there. You may play an entire day. I think I played Cerebral Vortex once in 9 matches on day 1. Didn't matter, though. It was still an exciting thing for me to know that it could have been played at any time in any one of those matches.
I think our statement of we're going to play with this weird card and we're going to have to defend it is Johnny. But I think the need to defend a card is Spike, right? Like, because most people are like, why are you playing that card? And I'm like, oh, I'm playing it because it's good against this matchup. Yeah. And that's a Spike mentality. And that's kind of what we're more talking towards, because the Timmy mentality is I'm playing this card because I like it. And that's like ostensibly what Commander is supposed to be about in a lot of people's eyes. And it's evolved into being able to appeal to each different audience, and the Spike side of like looking at a deck and really questioning like, why is this card here? Is it good enough? Is this a card that I should be playing? Does this help me in matchups? Is it going to lead towards the game state I want, which is winning? Excuse me. And I think in Modern and other competitive formats, Legacy, Standard, whatever, that conversation is always happening. It's why is this good? Now Johnnies are like, and we've done this to people. We had Zach Elsick on the podcast the day after he top 16'd a GP with Lantern Control, and we were like, why would you play this deck? And it was like, I was testing it. We've done a lot of testing. I can defend every single card in this deck, and I think this is the best deck in the format. And we were like, okay, yeah, sure. And then he won a GP a week later with the deck. So like, okay, putting is the argument won. So yes, going to Braden. I forgot which question we asked you because we went back and forth. But
I know with Braden, with your deck building experience when you build in cEDH, like, do you find yourself having that urge to put in, I guess if it's 3 out of 60, it's 5%. Like, do you find yourself having that urge to put in, 5% weird cards that you want to explain, or do you not really think that way?
I think this is like an interesting thing about Commander. So I think the most like well-known deck builder in cEDH is Shaper. And I remember when I met him, I asked him, like, why are you a good deck builder? And he said, oh, I only play good cards. And that was like a very interesting response. I think, knowing Shaper, I think that a lot of times what it is people only play like, it's really like people play when they post their deck lists online, they post like deck lists that have only good cards. And then in reality, a lot of times people play like 98 of that list, and then they have like a spicy card they really want to play.
Yeah, right.
In my experience, I'm kind of always trying to optimize. That's like what I get out of the format. Is I like tuning. So I'm always testing a few cards usually, but like the goal is to find like, the perfect list. I think my core build deck, I'm pretty satisfied with where it's at. I'm just waiting for more cards to come out to shift the metagame to like get to a point where I can feel like I'm doing that process again. I think in Commander though, the really unique thing is that you have these like commanders, which sounds silly, but like, let's say you want to play a blue-black console deck. I could pull out every blue-black commander that's ever been printed, right? So like Thrasios and Tymna up to Yuriko. And where I think the most of this happens is actually in that space, in the 2 to 3 color commanders, where people take an archetype and they shove it into a commander that has some unique synergy. So like a Yuriko Turbonaut deck. Oh, I get to play all these 0-mana creatures that are really good with Yuriko, and then, they're really good with Culling the Weak and Diabolic Intent and all these other cards that are good in Storm decks. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a really unique synergy. I'm going to test out this new archetype. That was a deck I built right at the beginning of COVID. So I think that's where like a lot of that is going on. In cEDH is a lot of people are saying like, I like Omnath. I'm going to build a 4-color Breach deck with Omnath, or I like Omnath. I'm going to build a 4-color Dockside deck with Omnath. Like that is that's where I see like the most of that happening, like day to day, like every day someone's trying something new. And cEDH is such a wide open format because that multiple, it's for the same reason, like Commander can absorb any card because there's like the multiplayer aspect, which kind of just like softens the blow of any single card's like manipulation or warping of the format. I think like cEDH is kind of similar. Like if you get really, really janky and you lose your power level, there's still the multiplayer aspect to kind of just soften that out a bit. If your brew is like too janky, you still have two other opponents to kind of help you out.
There are shells that are powerful that you can put into commanders that are powerful, but ostensibly the power of commander is the consistency of having access to that card. And I think that's true of all versions of the format, right? Like I have a Kess deck that is made to be casual, and it's built off the fact that like, oh, the Kess mechanic works with adventures. Like the you can cast the adventure half, and so you're allowed to reloop those creatures from your graveyard in a way that is unique to the way that the rules happen to align with that moment. Okay, so I want to play with adventure cards. Well, the best way to deal with that is I'm playing with a Kess deck, so I want spells, but now I have these creatures, and I want to be able to loop them. Okay, so I want sack outlets. Okay, so what are the best possible spell effects to go with sack outlets? And I landed on threaten effects. Okay, so I'm now going to be playing with a bunch of threaten effects in my Kess deck. What beyond, sack outlets are good with threat effects, and then you end up on time stop. You end up on Sundial the Infinite, or you end up on blink effects like Thassa that like blinks them and puts them into play under your control at the end of your turn. And so like that looped, and then basically the deck kind of built itself from that point on. And you go down these trains, and it makes sense that like, oh, I'm building a blue-black deck consultation, Thassa's Oracle deck. All right, so that I know the 30 cards or 20 cards that are just going to be a part of that combo, but I'm going to play with this commander. Now, what cards are the most powerful things you can do with that commander that then benefit that strategy? And Demonic Consultation being obviously a great one, right? I'm playing creatures and tokens, and now I can tutor for stuff.
Yeah, and then the interesting thing is in the community there begins a debate, like, oh, what's better, like a Yuriko Tribal High CMC deck or the Yuriko Storm deck? And then the community kind of hashes that out for a bit. So I think that's like, you mentioned Brewer's Paradise at the beginning when you're talking about Modern. I really feel like cEDH is the actual Brewer's Paradise, because you can find a community for any deck and just start hashing things out with them. And there's always going to be people who are passionate about their commanders because the nature of the format makes people passionate about their commanders,
I think what you said too about like there being two other players to smooth it out. That's kind of how you can get away with not playing the mana crypts and the cards that make your deck that much faster and better and consistent, is that like if you want to play with all real cards, no proxies, and you don't have a mana crypt, like yes, your deck will be made better by mana crypt, but Soul Ring you can get for like $1 or $2, and Soul Ring is really powerful, and it's going to be good in a lot of decks. And there's a lot of cards you can play that are going to get the job done that you don't actually need those crazy expensive cards. I also think the other thing that I try to do this with decks really in every format. So when I come up with an idea and I want to build something, I don't look online for reference points at deck lists until I've built my initial draft. I like to build the entire draft, the whole idea of the deck from scratch, before I will start to look up other lists using the same commander or other lists using the same card, because I find that if I look it up first, it's extremely hard to not just lean back on the ideas that someone else came up with. And even if it's the same ideas, right? Like I play an Arami deck in Commander that is really fun. I have a really good time playing it. And I was like, well, I want to be able to use Arami like multiple times in a turn. So like Pester Might, Deceiver Exarch, these are like really sweet cards to put into this deck. It's such a cool thing to be able to like put 3 copies of Deceiver into play. I can untap all these lands. I can untap Arami, like so much value. Now, when I looked up the lists later on, all the lists had come up with that exact same idea, but it didn't matter because coming up with it made me feel so much more energized and excited to keep building the list in the first place. It made the deck feel so much more authentic and personal that I actually finished building it. Whereas I think if you do the thing where you look at like a net deck, like an optimal deck list, so to speak, it's very easy to get so influenced by it that you feel like if you're not coming up with something more clever or creative than that list, you kind of just give up and it loses the excitement. It loses the luster.
Yeah.
And I think that's...
I do want to expand upon that in a second, but before we get to that, because I think that's enough of a separate conversation to have in a second on like brewing and cEDH in general. But really kind of going back to the conversation on like the argument for having an argument for a card and kind of what we're talking about where like card choices will lead you down paths. I do think that is how often decks are more often built in competitive Magic than even cEDH, right? Like I think cEDH, or not cEDH, EDH or Commander, where Commander a lot of times is just a pile of cards you own, right? Or like these are cool cards that work with my Commander, where in internal formats or competitive 60 card formats, it's much more like what is the best, like, how do I play with really good cards? And then the best decks often are like, I'm now playing with these really good cards. What are the best ways that these really good cards can work together? Can I play something like Thoughtseize in the Tarmogoyf into Liliana, where I like was able to play a thing to stop them early, play a threat, and I'm keep talking about Jund, and then play something that makes it so they can never do anything ever again while I beat them down with this 4/5. Or with Lantern Control, can I play a bunch of 1 mana like dumb artifacts that look like they don't do anything, but it makes it so my opponent will never be able to draw a card that's relevant again in the format? Or Tron, what are the best things that do well? I have now played a shell that finds me these 3 lands, and once I have these 3 lands, I can consistently get it on turn 3, and I now can have 13 mana available to me. What are the best cards that work with that are also good cards? And I think that is how deck building works when you think competitively, right? It's less about what cards do I like, and it's like, how do I take powerful cards and optimize the way that they relate to each other to the greatest degree possible.
I think one thing to add to that, though, is in Commander, because you have a Commander, sometimes you start out with just like, hey, I want to play this Commander. What's the best thing I can do here? And, some decks start out with, hey, I want to play Grixis and green. And so I'm going to play, I guess, whatever Commanders are viable in that color combination, maybe Yidris, maybe Thrasios, Valve Smasher. But then some other people will say, hey, the way they attack the problem is I want to play Yidris. What's the best Yidris deck? So I think that's kind of something that cEDH has to offer that's a little unique. I know obviously like archetypes exist in Modern, but I guess it's more like 3 things. You can pick an archetype, you can pick a color combination, you can pick a commander. I think that's like kind of what offers brewing in cEDH this like extra dimension, is that you do have like that big starting point in the command zone that you can kind of warp the whole deck around.
And I think that does bring us to the next conversation. So before we do that, please, everyone watching this video, hit like and subscribe. Once again, thank you, Braden, for joining the episode this week and all the conversations we're having. If you missed earlier, we did a whole video on cEDH in general and how being a competitive person can kind of lead that to being a fun way of playing Magic and how it relates to Modern. Definitely check that video. Also check out last week's video. We had Glenn Jones on for a 300th episode. We did a whole breakdown on like what he does as Wizards. He's currently he is the lead architect of kind of what Commander looks like at Wizards and how Commander relates to standard release sets and other product releases they're doing. It's one of the cooler episodes we've done in a long time, so definitely remember to check that out. Plus, it was our 300th episode, so hit that like, subscribe, bell button, all those things. I'm a content creator. Do the things that we are, you've watched a YouTube video, and it helps us succeed. And thank you, patrons, for all of your support. Pinkies up for all of the help you guys help making this happen. So, Ben, how do you feel about coffee?
Dude, I love me some coffee. I mean, the daily coffee walk at the office is like a highlight of my day.
Hashtag same. One thing I have been able to get into a little bit more since this year started is making my own coffee, which is really fun. I have cool devices. I feel like a mad scientist.
Yeah, pour over, you French press. There's so many options with coffee these days. But here's the thing, Alex. If in drinking your coffee you could make a difference in the world, would you?
Of course I would.
Of course you would. So look, we can help starving children with our morning coffee. We're going to talk to you guys right now about a partnership we're working on with Free Lunch Coffee. They're on a mission to end hunger from the lives of young children. So the way this works is that when you buy just 1 bag of Free Lunch Coffee, you're also providing 10 meals to children in need. 1 bag of coffee is 10 meals. Free Lunch Coffee gives away 50% of the money they make to end hunger in the lives of young children. Their coffee is specialty grade, it's certified organic, fair trade, and they offer 100% happiness guarantee for 30 days. So if you don't love their coffee, they'll just give you a full refund.
Yeah, and they also have these awesome tumblers and mugs. Who doesn't love collecting different cups to drink out of, especially if you spill a lot like me? They're great. Definitely check them out. They're actually offering through us a 10% discount code. So to our loyal listeners, all y'all friends, if you use the code MMCast at checkout, you'll get 10% off and they'll know that we sent you. So definitely check them out at freelunchcoffee.com. Make sure to use the code MMCast when you check out. That way you can get 10% off and help a bunch of kids in need, plus get great coffee, because we all drink coffee coffee because you need it to survive, or at least that's me. And you're helping people out now. So check it out, freelunchcoffee.com.